Have you ever heard of the Drake equation? The equation was written in 1961 by an American astronomer and astrophysicist named Frank Drake. He devised the equation in order to help stimulate discussion at the first scientific meeting on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The Drake equation estimates the number of active extraterrestrial civilizations in our Milky Way galaxy which are capable of communication. In order to get an accurate number of alien civilizations, you need to know the number of stars in the Milky Way and the fractions of those stars with habitable planets, with life, and with civilizations, as well as the typical lifespans of civilizations and the stars themselves. We can count the stars of the Milky Way reasonably enough. And we can use sophisticated telescopes like NASA's Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, or TESS, to search for planets orbiting other stars in our galaxy. We call these planets orbiting distant stars exoplanets, and scientists have already found thousands of them. But beyond counting stars and exoplanets, we can only guess about life and civilizations that may originate elsewhere in the cosmos. After all, we only know of one planet with life of any kind, our own. Under these circumstances, we may never solve the Drake equation. At least not until we find a way of traversing across the stars. For their part, Drake and his colleagues did their best. They estimated that there could be anywhere between 20 alien civilizations and 50 million alien civilizations in the Milky Way right now. In fact, they argued that the numbers were probably between 1,000 and 100 million, using less conservative parameters. Not surprisingly, these estimates have been heavily criticized, with others putting forth estimates ranging from 0 alien civilizations to 15 million. Let's just say that the Drake equation isn't going to help us solve any existential questions anytime soon. If we want to learn about the potential for life across our galaxy, we need to look closer to home. NASA and the other space agencies have all launched major missions with the goal of better understanding our closest planetary neighbor. Beyond searching for life itself, these missions are examining the red planet for signs of present or past habitability. They want to know if Mars now or ever had conditions that could sustain life. But short of finding direct evidence of life or fossils on Mars, we may never know if life ever evolved there. In this light, the best resource that we may have for studying the potential for life may be our own planet. As historical geologists, we can explore the rock record for the oldest signs of life. We can consider the conditions under which life most likely originated on our planet. What is the oldest evidence for life on Earth? How old is it? And how do we think that life was created in the first place? Before we can address these questions, we must address one more. What is life? You know it when you see it, but what are the actual signs of life? One of the most convincing signs of life is organization. Life is organized. It's not random like most of the natural processes that operate on our planet and universe. Life has structure, and it struggles constantly to decrease the entropy of the universe. Consider your own body. Your atoms are organized into compounds, which make up cells, which are organized into tissues, organs, and organ systems, which in totality make up your being. The pieces fit together with purpose. There are reasons for the way you are. Organization is a fundamental aspect of your existence. It grants you abilities and powers. One of your most basic powers, and another sign of life, is called metabolism. Your metabolism consists of all of the chemical reactions in your body that sustain your life and allow you to maintain your organization. There are many types of metabolic reactions. Your cells do respiration, a chemical reaction that transforms food and oxygen into carbon dioxide and energy. This energy sustains you. Land plants also do respiration, but they are known for another metabolic reaction, photosynthesis. They convert sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into oxygen and sugars, food that they can consume with respiration. Food that gets passed onto other organisms that make up food chains and food webs on our planet. These metabolic pathways are possible due to another property of life, homeostasis. Homeostasis means that organisms establish and maintain and regulate internal environments and conditions within their own bodies. Again, consider your body. You are probably 70% water. This water makes up the cytoplasm of your cells. It contributes to your blood, gastrointestinal juices, and brain fluids. The inside of your cells and the inside of your body as a whole differ dramatically from the atmospheric gases that surround you. And on various levels, you regulate how the chemistry of your body changes over time. Yet another sign of life are responses to stimuli. Life interacts with its environment. You have 5 senses that make you aware of your surroundings. When provoked, you adjust your behavior to deal with changes in your environment. Although other forms of life do not necessarily have the same senses, they all respond to stimuli in one way or another. Plants, for example, have a stimulus response called hydrotropism. Their roots move and grow toward water. Of course, life isn't static. Organisms are dynamic. They change over time. Organisms grow and develop. They reproduce and replicate themselves. And over many generations, life forms evolve, giving rise to new organisms through the process of speciation, further adding to the diversity of life. With an understanding of what defines life, we can begin to think about how life might have originated on Earth. Cells are the building blocks of all life on Earth. Some forms of life, like these brain-eating amoeba of the species Naegleria fowleri, are single-celled organisms. Each individual is just one cell, which is microscopic in size. Of course, many forms of life, both microscopic and macroscopic in size, are multicellular organisms, like this green alga, Volvox. Volvox consists of multiple cells. Your body probably contains around 37 trillion cells. Red blood cells, white blood cells, nerves, cells that produce bone, and others that flex muscles. Given that all life on Earth consists of cells, we can assume that the first life forms on Earth were single-celled organisms. We can't rule out the possibility that life may have originated on our planet more than once. But most scientists favor the hypothesis that all life forms on Earth can trace their roots back to one organism, their last common ancestor. One life form originated on Earth, took root, and gave rise to all of the branches on the tree of life. The first steps in the origin of this life form must have been the synthesis of simple organic molecules like DNA, RNA, and lipids. DNA and RNA are the genetic material, the code for instructions that guide operations of life. These molecules are necessary for metabolic reactions. They are also necessary for reproductions. Organisms require genetic material to replicate themselves and produce offspring. Lipids are the molecules that make up the membranes that surround cells. These membranes act as barriers between the insides and the outsides of the cells. They are necessary for establishing and regulating homeostasis. They also contain a number of transport proteins and other molecules that allow cells to respond to stimuli, to move, to bring in new chemicals. But the lipids had to come first, and they had to come from somewhere. Lipid molecules have a very interesting property. The molecules are comprised of atoms. In each lipid molecule, there is a head and two tails made up of different combinations and arrangements of atoms. The polar heads of these molecules are hydrophilic. They like water and they mix with it. The nonpolar tails, on the other hand, are hydrophobic. They don't like water. It repels them. Due to these interactions with water, lipid molecules self-organize themselves into lipid bilayers. Each side of the bilayer is a lipid molecule. The tails position themselves toward the interior of the bilayer. The heads move to the surface. These bilayers are the cell membranes. They prevent water from passing from the extracellular space outside of the cell into the cytosol, the fluid inside of it. In the presence of water, lipid molecules self-organize themselves into lipid bilayers. The bilayers do not require life or any template to form, only the presence of lipid molecules. The bilayers assemble themselves into spheroidal, membrane-bound structures called vesicles. These spheres contain fluid. The fluid inside of these vesicles are separated from the surrounding environment by the bilayer, so they have homeostasis, if not other properties of life. In this context, life may have evolved on Earth when naturally occurring lipids self-organized themselves into vesicles, and in the process encapsulated DNA and RNA. In essence, life may have started when naturally forming lipids formed around genetic material. From there, natural but random evolutionary forces would have driven the diversification of life, the evolution of other organelles in the cells, the evolution of complexity, of mobility, of metabolic reactions. But where did the organics come from in the first place? The first hypothesis suggests that the building blocks of life came to Earth from outer space. And no, this hypothesis doesn't require alien intervention. Stony meteorites, called carbonaceous chondrites, sometimes contain simple organic molecules like hydrogen cyanide, formic acid, aldehydes, and acetylenes. Comets also contain these molecules. So it is conceivable that the organic precursors of life were brought to Earth by space rocks, perhaps sometime during the late heavy bombardment that lasted from 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago. In recent years, the hypothesis that life originated near hydrothermal vents has gained a lot of steam. Hydrothermal vents, often called black and white smokers, are underwater geysers, usually located deep in the ocean along the mid-ocean ridge. Around these vents, seawater seeps into the Earth's crust. In the subsurface, the water is heated by hot, molten fluid rock called magma, deep in the Earth. As the water is heated, it rises back to the surface where it is expelled as superheated steam and water. As water passes through the Earth before exiting a hydrothermal vent, it picks up various chemicals like hydrogen sulfide, iron, methane, and carbon dioxide. These chemicals are released to the ocean through the vents. Altogether, hydrothermal vents provide some of the key building blocks needed for life: energy, organic molecules, and other chemicals that could support metabolic reactions. For these reasons, scientists believe hydrothermal vents could have been the cradle of life on Earth. The final hypothesis purports that life arose through a series of organic chemical reactions, which produced increasingly complex biochemical structures from their organic precursors. In this scenario, gases that were common in the early Earth atmosphere would have combined to form simple organic chemicals, which in turn would have combined into more complex molecules like lipids and DNA. In 1952, Stanley Miller at the University of Chicago famously tested this hypothesis with the assistance of Harold Urey. Miller made a model of the Precambrian atmosphere and ocean in a laboratory glass vessel and exposed a mixture of water, nitrogen, and carbon monoxide to electrical sparks in order to mimic lightning, which could stimulate a chemical reaction. After a few days, they found a brown precipitate in their vials. This precipitate contained sugars, amino acids, and nucleotides, some of the key building blocks of DNA and life as a whole. Subsequent experiments produced even more chemicals and similar results. The Miller-Urey experiment has not escaped criticism. We now know that Miller's model of the atmosphere differed greatly from the Precambrian. His model contained too much methane and should have had more water vapor. Nonetheless, most scientists regard the results of the experiment as evidence that the biochemical hypothesis is at least plausible. However it happened, and life originated on Earth. When did this happen? And what is the oldest evidence for life on Earth? There is a wide array of evidence to suggest that life originated sometime during the Archean eon. And some recent studies have even suggested that life may have originated during the Hadean eon over 4 billion years ago. These more recent works are highly contentious. Scientists generally believe that life evolved in the Archean. Some of the oldest evidence of life comes from carbon isotopes. Recall that isotopes are atoms of an element that differ with regard to their numbers of neutrons. There are 15 known isotopes of carbon, but only 3 of these isotopes occur in nature: carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14. We identify these isotopes based on their atomic mass, the number of protons plus neutrons. Carbon-12, for example, has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Its atomic mass is 12. Most atoms of carbon are carbon-12 isotopes. Carbon-13 and carbon-14 isotopes are comparatively rare, making up a little over 1% of all carbon atoms. Organisms incorporate all isotopes of carbon into their beings, but their metabolic reactions favor carbon-12. For this reason, they tend to contain more carbon-12 than you would expect. Because of this, scientists study the ratio of the concentrations of carbon-12 and carbon-13 in geologic samples. We'll call this ratio delta. Low delta values in geologic samples provide evidence of life in the past, as the metabolic pathways of organisms are some of the only processes that can produce samples with high concentrations of carbon-12 and low concentrations of carbon-13. The oldest sedimentary rocks on Earth occur in Greenland. They make up a stratigraphic unit called the Ishwa group. These rocks are between 3.7 and 3.8 billion years old. Although the rocks have undergone metamorphism, they still contain organic carbon. This organic carbon has a low delta value. The samples contain higher ratios of carbon-12 to carbon-13 than you would predict under ordinary circumstances. The carbon isotopes indicate that life may have evolved on Earth early in the Archean. Scientists have also analyzed Hadean samples for isotopes in graphite, a crystalline form of carbon. The graphite occurs in zircon crystals, and its carbon isotopes also have low delta values, which are suggestive of life. If this work can be substantiated, it suggests that life originated in Earth history early. It's difficult to rule out the possibility that the carbon isotopes may be wrong, or at least misleading. It's possible that natural processes other than life could have produced these carbon isotope data. So scientists are busy searching Precambrian rocks for other signs of life. This search has led to the discovery of many microscopic structures, which could represent fossils of early life. None, perhaps, are more famous than these structures that occur in the 3.4 billion year old apex chert in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. Scientists originally interpreted these structures as filamentous cyanobacteria, strings of cells of bacteria that conduct photosynthesis. This interpretation sparked intense debate in the scientific community, and many geologists still aren't sure if these particular structures are actually fossils or pseudofossils. Other discoveries in the Archean, however, include bioaccretionary structures like these stromatolites, which could have only formed in the presence of life. Life, it seems, evolved somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5 billion years ago. Life may have even evolved during a very tumultuous time in history, like the late heavy bombardment, when Earth and the other rocky planets of the solar system were experiencing near constant impacts and collisions with space rocks. Although the earliest life forms on Earth must have been very simple, they may have been highly resilient too.